Triangulation is a political strategy, not a national security strategy. When just a single clue that goes unlearned or one lead that goes unpursued can bring on catastrophe, it's no time for splitting differences. There is never a good time to compromise when the lives and safety of the American people hang in the balance. Behind the overwrought reaction to enhanced interrogations is a broader misconception about the threats that still face our country. You can sense the problem in the emergence of euphemisms that strive to put an imaginary distance between the American people and our terrorist enemy. Apparently, using the term war where terrorists are concerned is starting to feel a bit dated. So henceforth, we're advised by the administration to think of the fight against terrorists as, quote, overseas contingency operations. In the event of another terrorist attack on America, the Homeland Security Department assures us it will be ready for this, quote, man-made disaster. Never mind that the whole department was created for the purpose of protecting Americans from terrorist attack. And when you hear that there are no more enemy combatants, as there were back in the days of that scary war on terror, at first that sounds like progress. The only problem is that the phrase is gone, but the same assortment of killers and would-be mass murderers are still there. And finding some less judgmental or more pleasant-sounding name for terrorists doesn't change what they are or what they would do if we let them loose. On his second day in office, President Obama announced he was closing the detention facility at Guantanamo. This step came with little deliberation and no plan. Now the President says some of these terrorists should be brought to American soil for trial in our court system. Others, he says, will be shipped to third countries. But so far the United States has had little luck getting other countries to take hardened terrorists. So what happens then? Attorney General Holder and others have admitted that the United States will be compelled to accept terrorists here in the homeland, and it has even been suggested U.S. taxpayer dollars will be used to support them. On this one, I find myself in complete agreement with many of the President's own party, unsure how to explain to their constituents why terrorists might soon be relocating in their states. These Democrats chose instead to strip funding for such a move out of the most recent war supplemental. The administration has found that it's easy to receive applause in Europe for closing Guantanamo, but it's tricky to come up with an alternative that will serve the interest of justice and America's national security. Keep in mind that these are hardened terrorists picked up overseas since 9/11. The ones that were considered low risk were released a long time ago. And among these, it turns out that many were treated too leniently because they cut a straight path back to their prior line of work and have conducted murderous attacks in the Middle East. An estimated 14% of those released previously are believed to be back in the business of jihad. I think the President will find upon reflection that to bring the worst of the worst terrorists inside the United States would be cause for great danger and regret in the years to come. In the category of euphemism, the prize-winning entry would be a recent editorial in a familiar newspaper that referred to terrorists we captured as, quote, abducted. Here we have ruthless enemies of this country stopped in their tracks by brave operatives in the service of America. And a major editorial page makes them sound like they were kidnapped victims picked up at random on their way to the movies. It's one thing to adopt the euphemisms that suggest we're no longer engaged in a war. These are just words, and in the end, it's the policies that matter most. You don't want to call them enemy combatants? Fine, call them what you want, just don't bring them into the United States. Tired of calling it a war? Use any term you prefer. Just remember, it is a serious step to begin unveiling some of the very policies that have kept our people safe since 9/11. Another term out there that slipped into the discussion is the notion that American interrogation practices were a, quote, recruitment tool for the enemy. On this theory, by the tough questioning of killers, we have supposedly fallen short of our own values. This recruitment tool theory has become something of a mantra lately, including from the President himself. And after a familiar fashion, it excuses the violent and blames America for the evil that others do. It's another version of that same old refrain from the left, we brought it on ourselves. It is much closer to the truth that terrorists hate this country precisely because of the values we profess and seek to live by, not by some alleged failure to do so. Nor are terrorists or those who see them as victims exactly the best judges of America's moral standards, one way or the other. Critics of our policies are given to lecturing on the theme of being consistent with American values, but no moral value held dear by the American people obliges public servants to sacrifice innocent lives to spare a captured terrorist from unpleasant things. And when an entire population is targeted by a terror network, nothing is more consistent with American values than to stop them. As a practical matter, terrorists may lack much, but they've never lacked for grievances against the United States. Our belief in freedom of speech and religion, our belief in equal rights for women, our support for Israel, our cultural and political influence in the world, these are the true sources of resentment, all mixed in with the lies and conspiracy theories of radical clerics. These recruitment tools were in vigorous use throughout the 1990s, and they were sufficient to motivate the 19 recruits who boarded those planes on September 11, 2001. The United States of America was a good country before 9/11, just as we are today. List all the things that make us a force for good in the world, for liberty, for human rights, for the rational, peaceful resolution of differences, and what you end up with is a list of the reasons why the terrorists hate America. If fine speech-making appeals to reason, or pleas for compassion had the power to move them, the terrorists would long ago have abandoned the field. And when they see the American government caught up in arguments about interrogations or whether foreign terrorists have constitutional rights, they don't stand back in awe of our legal system and wonder whether they had misjudged us all along. Instead, the terrorists see just what they were hoping for: our unity gone, our resolve shaken, our leaders distracted. In short, they see weakness and opportunity. What is equally certain is this: the broad-based strategy set in motion by President Bush obviously had nothing to do with causing the events of 9/11. But the serious way we dealt with terrorists from then on, and all the intelligence we gathered in that time, had everything to do with preventing another 9/11 on our watch. The enhanced interrogations of high-value detainees and the terrorist surveillance program have, without question, made our country safer. Every senior official who's been briefed on these classified matters knows of specific attacks that were in the planning stages and were stopped by the programs we put in place. This might explain why President Obama has reserved unto himself the right to order the use of enhanced interrogation should he deem it appropriate. What value remains to that authority is debatable, given that the enemy now knows exactly what interrogation methods to train against and which ones not to worry about. Yet having reserved for himself the authority to order enhanced interrogation after an emergency, you would think President Obama would be less disdainful of what his predecessor authorized after 9/11. It's almost gone unnoticed that the President has retained the power to order the same methods in the same circumstances. When they talk about interrogations, he and his administration speak as if they have resolved some great moral dilemma in how to extract critical information from terrorists. Instead, they put the decision off while assigning a presumption of moral superiority to any decision they might make in the future.